Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the special meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority Board on Wednesday, March 23rd. Yes, but it's all on the same calendar.
Our executive director is getting coffee.
Right. So, again, I'm Don Tatson, chair for this evening's meeting, and we're delighted to have everyone here. We begin with public comment. This is an opportunity for people to speak on an item that is within our purview but is not on our agenda. We would ask people making public comments to limit their comments to 3 minutes, and I do have one request for public comment from Jason Bezos. Mr. Bezos. Oh, wasn't here. Can you just hold it? I'll tell you what, we have a special, Mr. Bezos? Mr. Bezos, come forward. We have a special opportunity for you. Before you make your statement, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you. And now we look forward to your comment.
Hey, excuse me, the microphone isn't on. They're working it. There you go.
Yeah, hi, good evening. My name is Jason Bezos. I'm of Lafayette, and I last addressed your board back on November 19th, 2014, concerning the 1/8% AB 1107 sales tax. And as I said then, since 1978 in inflation-adjusted terms, $380 million have been collected of this tax in central and eastern Contra Costa County, and none of it has been returned. So again, $380 million, and that was as of the end from 1978 to 2012. I haven't updated the numbers yet, but it's likely gone over $280 million, and that includes about $115 million from Concord, about $80 million from Walnut Creek, and so on. And that's a concern because now that you're moving towards a sales tax increase, I think it's important that the concerns be addressed. And I said in that letter that I wanted CCTA to take some kind of action to perhaps ask the use a section of the Public Utilities Code to have the fair share be returned to Central and Eastern Contra Costa County. And I should point out, too, this also applies to Hercules and Pinole. I'm going a little fast here, but basically all the funds collected here for the 1/8% of the existing sales tax are allocated by MTC 50-50 between AC Transit and Muni in San Francisco. So that means none is returned to Central and Eastern Contra Costa counties. And so I'd asked back on November 19, 2014, I'll be giving a copy of the letter today, an original, and they can be distributed electronically. I'll also email the electronic version of it. But I think that before seeking a sales tax, this needs to be dealt square, head-on, publicly. Maybe I'm missing something, but the way I see it, we need to see some return on those funds. Instead, MTC has the existing power right now. You could be right now putting that money towards, we have $400 million you've been asked for Bart cars. It can go towards Bart under the Public Utilities Code. You don't have to go back to the legislature. It's just a matter of MTC, and of course it's convincing the other counties, which is a challenge there. But anyway, that is the point, is that you existing funds, this needs to be dealt with first at $380 million, is according to my calculations from 1978 to 2012. You can't look at someone straight in the face in Central and Eastern Contra Costa County and say, you give us more money when this has not been dealt with. And again, it should be dealt with publicly, and I did that 16 months ago, and I'm disappointed that to the best of my knowledge. That's why I include in my letter also a formal Public Records Act request that have CCTA explain if it's done anything in the past 16 months. And finally, I'd point out that the only way you can get this you're getting this on the ballot in November is because of the special law called AB 210, which authorizes CCTA to circumvent the statewide cap on sales tax rates, and it was, quote, because of unique physical pressures being experienced in the County of Alameda and the County of Contra Costa in providing essential transportation programs. Well, if Contra Costa County is facing such unique fiscal pressures, then why isn't this being addressed, the 1/8%? This is something that I think needs to be dealt straight on, because a lot of people will have pause about giving more money to CCTA. And again, CCTA doesn't have necessary jurisdiction over this right now. It's MTC. But CCTA needs to take some action in the next few months before putting this tax forward, at least asking MTC formally to take a look at it and explaining publicly. I understand through back channels people have said, oh, no, it's a fair deal right now, but let's put this out in the open. And so I'll present this, and I'll also email this.
Very good. Thank you. Are there any questions for the speaker? All right. We look forward to receiving the letter. Is there anyone else who would like to speak during public comment? Seeing none, then move on to item 1, which is the approval of the minutes from our meeting of March 9th and March 16th. Oh, sorry. There will be brought forward. A future meeting. Never mind. Moving forward to the consent calendar. And I just asked the attorney, this is essentially a regular authority item. It's okay, I assume it's okay to handle it at this meeting?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Move approval.
All right. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. That's unanimous. That brings us to the regular agenda item regarding the development of a potential transportation expenditure plan. And our main discussion item for this evening is the discussion of the performance evaluation of alternative transportation plan expenditure options. And I welcome Mr. Engelman to lead us through this discussion.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, board members. Martin Engelman, Deputy Executive Director for Planning at CCTA. Welcome, everybody. It's a beautiful evening. And I'm going to tell you about a performance evaluation that we've completed on the draft expenditure plan. Thank you. So, a few key questions that we want to answer for you tonight is, so you have a $2.3 billion proposed draft expenditure plan. It's still under development. It hasn't been released yet, but we want to look at it as far as what we know about it at this point and figure out how it affects travel patterns, what it does for air quality, what does it do to benefit the movement and the movement of people and goods in Contra Costa. And we've also performed an equity analysis to determine how the plan affects low-income and minority communities. So we have, in the report that's in your packet, we have 4 alternatives. The first one, 2013, is existing conditions. And then we go out to a 2040 horizon year, and we start with Plan Bay Area, the adopted RTP for the Bay region. Then we add onto that 2 alternatives, and these alternatives, neither of these are the draft TEP that you're going to adopt, but these are intended to be bookends. So at one end, alternative A is MTC RTP plus projects and programs that are primarily transit, a transit emphasis. Alternative B is the RTP plus $2.3 billion investment in projects and programs with a highway emphasis. Your draft TEP is probably going to be somewhere in between. Now, these 2 alternatives, A and B, they aren't all transit, all highway. They are still a mix of projects, transit and highway. It's just that A has more transit and B has more highway. So our methods for evaluation consist of 2 things. One, a while back we did a qualitative assessment of all the major projects that are in our countywide transportation plan, and we used MTC's performance criteria, and you'll remember we gave it a thumbs up or a thumbs down to determine whether or not the project supported MTC's performance criteria. And that report is in the appendix of the performance analysis of the evaluation. But really the thing we want to present to you tonight is what we found from the countywide model, because we did run these alternatives using our countywide model. We start with the Bay Area's 10, with the Bay Area 9-county model, and we focus in on Contra Costa. So this is really looking at the Bay Area with a focus on Contra Costa, and we are able to model transit investments like BART extensions, things like that. We're able to model freeway and operations programs, freeway improvements, and we're able to model programs that support bicycling and walking. Important to have good inputs. These are kind of what drives the whole model. And you're familiar with the population, household, jobs forecast. Contra Costa is going to grow between 2010 and 2040. We expect a 28% increase in population. Nearly 90,000 new homes will be built in Contra Costa. 36% increase in jobs. So we're expecting a healthy economy and a growing economy. The performance measures that we looked at are quantitative in this case. We're looking at real numbers. And system performance involves things like what's the total vehicle miles traveled, what's the total vehicle delay, what are the speeds. Equity analysis, we know where the communities of concern are, and we see where the investments are made and see whether they are, whether everybody is getting their fair share of benefits from the TEP investment. And then the last one, we have a air quality model that we used. And the process is shown at the bottom of this slide. So we have the inputs that we started with, the population and so forth, and then all the projects and programs. It goes into the countywide model. The output from the countywide model goes into CARB's emissions factors model, and that gives us the information on what's happening with air quality. So what did we find? First of all, looking at modal share, all four of the alternatives are up here, and the bottom light blue part is single occupant vehicles, then dark blue is carpools, and green is transit, lighter green is bike and walk. From this slide, you can't see a whole lot of difference in what's happening in modal shift. But the next slide will give you a little closer in picture of what's going on, and there is some interesting information regarding the performance of transit. So existing conditions for transit, there are two y-axes on this graphic. So the left one is the percent that use transit, and the right one is the actual number of trips. And so that line on top is the percent, and it works with the left axis. In existing conditions, 2.7% use transit for total trips. With MTC's RTP in 2040, that goes up to 3.3. If you invest your TEP in transit emphasis projects, it goes all the way up to 3.7, 175,000 transit riders per day. And with the highway alternative as well, alternative B, it still goes a little bit higher than the MTC RTP at 3.4%. Another performance measure we look at is vehicle miles traveled, very important from the standpoint of calculating greenhouse gas emissions. So population is going to go up, as we said earlier, more drivers, more people on the road. So vehicle miles traveled, as you can see, increases for all of the alternatives. And it's about the same as the population increase, 26%. Vehicle miles traveled per person, today it's 21 miles. It stays about the same in the future, not expecting a lot of changes there. Third line's a little bit disturbing. Vehicle hours of delay, since the system is already packed and we're not expanding the system significantly, vehicle hours of delay triple in 2040 under the RTP. But as you can see, if we invest in transit alternative A, it drops 5%, and then alternative B, vehicles hours of delay with the highway emphasis, drops about 14% from the RTP. So we can put a dent in the total vehicle hours of delay, but it's difficult to make it go back down to where it is today. So turning now to the equity analysis, one of the things we look at is is everybody getting their fair share of benefits? So this particular measure, and there's several of them, I'm not going to show them all to you tonight, but they're all in the report. What about average vehicle trip time? So on the left, the typical county household has a shorter trip time with alternative A and alternative B than compared to the RTP. Not much shorter, but a little bit shorter. And if we look at only low-income households, we see the same benefit. They start with shorter trip times, and the trip times improve with alternative A and B. Similarly, with minority households, you can see kind of the same shape of those three bars. And so that what that tells us is that our investments are benefiting, our $2.3 billion investment is benefiting everyone across the county as well as low-income and minority households at about the same level. Another equity evaluation criteria is, where does the money get spent? And is it all going to rich communities, poor communities? So by 2040, this sounds funny, by 2040, 53% of households are minorities. Does that make sense? So it's true. So 53% are minorities. So that dotted line is Contra Costa County, 53% are minorities. Now, what percent of the funding gets invested in minority households? Under Alternative A, the transit alternative, it's 53%. So it's very equitable. Under Alternative B, the highway emphasis, a little lower percentage, and minority households don't benefit as much. Similarly, 22% on the right here, 22% of households in Contra Costa are low income. And so Alternative A, low-income households get a little more than 22% of the funding, and B, a little bit less. So that's the equity stuff. And now let's look at air quality. Interesting results on air quality. Things are looking good as far as the good old smog stuff that you used to see. Reactive organic gases, nitrous oxides, carbon monoxide, particulate matter. You can see from this graph, compared to 2013, the tons per day of emissions goes way down, like 70 to 80% down under all of the alternatives, with the transit alternative showing a reduction in reactive organic gases. But these jump around a little bit by alternative, but the drop is significant, and that's because of cleaner cars, which we're going to call PAVLI and the Clean Car Act. Those things combined give us higher gas mileage and cleaner fuels. With regard to CO2, the greenhouse gas that vehicles emit, that goes down under all of the alternatives compared to today, primarily because we have cleaner cars. Total emissions go down as well with the PAVLI improvements and advanced clean cars. 2013, they're at 3 million, and they go down to 2 million. Alternative A, you'll see, is a little bit higher than MTC's RTP, and that's actually because we are running around a lot of buses in Alternative A. A lot higher frequency of buses, and the buses are emitting a little bit more under A, and still higher under B with the improvements to the highways. But overall, a 35% reduction compared to 2013. So this is, I think, very interesting. The what's happening with the clean cars and what's going to happen between now and 2050. There's a real push to meet the governor's executive order of a 80% below 1990 level of emissions by 2050, and we're looking very closely at that, and we want to make sure that our TEP is helping us to get there. This graph is prepared by California Air Resources Board, and you can see that we're trying to wean ourselves off of gasoline by 2050, and the 100% at the top of this chart corresponds for California to 14 billion gallons of gas a year. For the nation, it's roughly 10 times that, 140 billion. So we want to go from 140 billion for the nation down to 10% of that, down to 14 billion. And the way that'll be achieved is through what you see out there today, hybrid vehicles, plug-in hybrid vehicles, more and more battery, and then there is significant promise for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. They're not on the road yet, but Toyota's working on the first one, and hopefully it'll be out there, and it should be a very clean car. So this is the big picture, and we want to look at, does the TEP help support that? So what if we did nothing? What if we didn't have Pavley? What if we didn't have clean cars? This is what happens. The greenhouse gases just keep on going up, and this is for Contra Costa County. The blue line is the RTP, Alternative A and Alternative B, business as usual. It's hard to see any difference. If you expand in a little bit, you can see Alternative B is a little bit higher than the RTP, Alternative A a little lower, but we're talking about minuscule differences. Now, we kick in Pavley and advanced clean cars. The line is going down, as you can see. But the data only goes to 2040, and there's a gap there between 2040 and 2050. So, and if you straight line, it looks like we're going to miss that line at the bottom, the dotted line, which is 80% below 1990 levels. So to get there, we have to accelerate the penetration of zero-emission vehicles, and in combination with that, we still have to further reduce vehicle miles traveled. And according to our modeling, if we have a 58% penetration and a 15% increase or reduction in VMT, we can make the governor's order. And that's actually very promising, because the previous chart, as you saw, 87% penetration was required. And if you look back at Sandag had to go to 75. According to our calculations, we can make it with 58. But we don't like the way that looks, and we don't like pushing the responsibility of meeting the governor's order out to 2040. So what we want to do is use the TEP to achieve this straight line, and that there are many ways that we can do that. And the TEP that you have before you already has funding for more electric vehicle, more charging stations, more transportation demand management, TSM, and integrated corridor management systems. All of those things can help us force this line down, and so it's something for you to consider as you develop your proposed draft TEP. So in conclusion, what we found is we think that the TEP has a lot of positive outcomes, and it benefits all residents of Contra Costa. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you. So I'll take questions, and then we'll have public comment. Okay. Commissioner Bart.
Well, I just want to know if my conclusions are accurate or not. But what I derive from this is that that this plan will not have any significant impact on vehicle miles traveled per capita. It certainly is going to make vehicle hour delay worse. It's not going to have any significant impact on average speeds. But I want to go back and focus on the on the VMT and also the greenhouse gas reduction. Now, I don't know if I've got the latest edition of this or not, but I'm looking at the principles that we adopted, and they may have been tweaked a little bit. But number 5 says the Contra Costa Transportation Authority will seek to develop a transportation expenditure plan that provides widespread benefits for all people in areas of Contra Costa. promotes a healthy environment and strong economy, results in a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and per capita vehicle miles traveled, supporting transportation for livable community projects, and addresses future demographic and technological changes and innovation. The conclusion I draw from this is that, and I'm not saying it's bad, there's a lot of good stuff in the TEP, but the conclusion I'm drawing from it is that it's pretty much business as usual, and that all of the reduction in greenhouse gases and the reduction in air quality and so forth are all pinned on Pavley. That's my conclusion, and I'm really disappointed. I'd sort of hoped that we would be doing something transformative here, and I don't think it is. I think it's just build more of it and do what we've been doing forever, and Pavley's going to save us. And I said before, it's not all bad. There's a lot of money in here for transit. There's a lot of money in here for alternative modes of transportation. There's some good stuff in here. But at the end of the day, this is not a transformative exercise. It's just do what we've been doing pretty much. So I don't know if I'm wrong or not. I had a long talk with Randy about it, and he said we'd get some new insight on it tonight, but I don't see it.
Thank you. Commissioner Hudson?
Yeah. Well, to get right to it, Tom, you're wrong. The one thing we did do is not continue down the line of business as usual. We would be up around 500 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent annually if we had not made the change when we did with the executive order, then the scoping plan, and SB 375 that followed. Now, Pavley may be in SB 375, but the sustainable community strategy that we're doing, you don't really get the credit of what Pavley's doing. What you're doing is the 10 points that MTC and ABAG worked out, including the transit livable communities, the reductions down to the 1990 level, which is roughly 10 million metric tons per capita. Well, there's 81 million people, or 81 million metric tons annually in the Bay Area right now, and we're about 7.5 million people. We're not that far off. We will make the AB 32 mandate that was called for. This is on top of that. That's going to be tough, but it is definitely not business as usual. It's the opposite direction. There have been major changes from the port, from what we're doing with the sustainable community strategy, and just the general attitude of people looking at electric vehicles, which was not happening 5 years ago. I think we need to look more at the positive and where this TEP can take us, rather than keep spitting out business as usual. Business as usual is dead. We've turned that corner. We're going the other way. This is a success story, not a sad story.
Mr. Osaki?
Just a couple comments, Commissioners. One is I think there's only 2 times in the history of the automobile that the VMT ever dropped. One was during the Carter years, and the other was most recently during the Great Recession. And nobody ever predicted that VMT was going to drop. So that's one of the issues that we put in that chart, is that we assume a 15% VMT reduction, and that's going to be very hard to do. The other factor is if you look back 10 years ago, probably to this day maybe, the iPhone or the smartphone came out. The smartphone was introduced. It revolutionized the way we provide information to the public, and it's still doing that on a daily basis as it gets better and better. And so one of the things that Martin keyed in on early was, as you were looking at that, is yes, Pavley and cleaner technologies get us a great reduction in greenhouse gases, and that's a great thing because government works best when we have a deadline and we have a performance measure, a metric to go to. And so we'll do everything we can to meet that 80% reduction by the year 2050. We may even exceed it because we underestimated the penetration of new technologies. But the piece that Martin touched on very briefly was the modeling tools don't detect things like traffic network companies, so Uber and Lyft, business model changes, because the way you
you approach owning a car ownership may be different in the future, or the millennials may not own. So these things are not factored into there. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to achieve a faster reduction to get you where you want to be by the year 2050. And that's what we try to show. And we're actually challenging our modelers to not only factor in the zero-emission vehicles, as we said, 58% penetration, Sandag was a 75, and CARB figured 87. We're on the conservative side on that, and we still meet that goal. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how to model the different business models, the different technologies, and take advantage of that in our 25-year plan look ahead. The other thing is you're going to need money in the future to be able to leverage other people's money to implement that technology, and that's really where the transformation comes from. And then we'll be able to leverage other people's money, other people's technology. If you stack money on the existing measure in buckets that are there today, you're not going to be able to do that. That's one of the things that handicaps us now, is there's no spare dollars. That's why we're always searching for that next grant. And so I would suggest that there is more innovation. It's maybe in between the lines, if you will. But I think that we spent some time trying to envision the future. In Martin's presentation, I thought Martin did a great job. Thanks.
Okay, so Martin, maybe along the lines of that, I was reading a newspaper article last week that indicated that in the La Marinda area, about 10% of the workers now telecommute. And I don't know whether that's lower or higher than it is in the rest of the county, but certainly a lot higher than it was when I was working. So how do we factor things like that into the model, or do we?
Well, telecommuting has a lot of promise, and it has more than tripled over the past decade and a half. And so we have a very nice graph on that shows that it's gone way up from 80, 90, 2000, 2010. Actually, we've been tracking it for a long time. So we do account for it in the model, but we don't think it's realistic to say that it is going to keep going up at the rate that it's been. We think it's going to flatten. So we assume it's going to go up, but it's going to level out, because there's only so much telecommuting that you can do. And you'll recall that all the Yahoo employees got called back. They were all telecommuting, and they got told to show up to work. So it's been going back and forth, but we do assume a higher percentage than today.
Other questions before I go to public comment? Commissioner Wirth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I remember these comments when we were looking at the same thing about the regional transportation plan, that what were the indicators that moved the needle, and I think it was pretty consistent with what we found in Contra Costa County. I did have a question, though. One of the things is that Contra Costa, because of our housing inventory, we provide a lot of workers that travel, across the regions for service jobs. So as you're calculating those equity calculations, does that take into account some of the freeway investments where people are traveling from home to work in jobs that, for example, don't really have access to transit? They're either, living, working at hours where transit isn't available, or they're living or working in environments that don't have access to, high quality distance transit. So did that model at all come into play in terms of some of those equity issues, and as we're modeling where our residents are going and who are going and where?
It does, in that it looks at the income of each of the census tract, the cross-section of income, and then it looks at the location and proximity to transit, and then it looks at the time and the cost of the trip, and it also looks at auto ownership. So low-income households have fewer cars than higher income. So all of that goes into the analysis, and the determination is then made. The model figures out whether or not they're going to take transit, and obviously if they don't have a car, they have to take transit. But if they're not close to transit and they have a car, then they'll drive.
So where do you get that information to be able to pull up and say, okay, X percentage of our, say, middle or lower income residents are living in places or working in places where there is no transit, and therefore you look at the benefit of a highway investment, which is going to directly affect and help those workers.
So the demographic information
Right.
comes from MTC
Right.
and from ABAG at the census tract level, and then we focus in at a smaller, more fine-grained level for the county. The whole decision formula, that's a bunch of equations, very long, complex equations that are developed over time and validated to existing conditions and existing choices. So we're able to recreate what happens today, and then we apply that to the future with some changes that we know in terms of policy and income and vehicle ownership models and so forth.
Right. So we can look at those factors and say, okay, X percentage of, say, low income or moderate income drivers are using these corridors. You know, there's this assumption that there's, you know, demographic distributions are probably not necessarily true in terms of showing that all segments of our community are using, say, those corridors. Okay.
Yes, we could.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Commissioner Button and Commissioner Simmons.
Well, okay, the one thing I do appreciate, the point Randy bringing up is that, is the one of flexibility and new technologies. I think that, and I've always said that I think when we create the final draft of this, it needs to have maximum flexibility built into it because things are rapidly changing. And, you know, just going back to this thing about vehicles, you know, again, if you look at these don't have numbers on them. It's the page 6, top of the page. You know, the current vehicle miles traveled per capita is 21, and with alternate A it's 20.8, alternate B it's 21.2. So it's basically the same, and the vehicle hours of delay triples with both of these, almost triples. And so I think what the thing that bothers me about this plan is we're essentially saying, okay, in 2040, we're going to be living the same way we're living now. We're all going to have cars. We're all going to drive everywhere we go, but the cars are going to be cleaner, and that's going to save us. And I don't think that's a sustainable model. I mean, look at the vehicle hours of delay from 71,000 to 209,000 with alternative A. That's triple the hours of delay. That is not a sustainable model. That's not the way people can live in 2040 and have any kind of quality of life. You know, we need something that's more visionary. We need something that creates a better future instead of the same future with cleaner cars. It just doesn't work.
Commissioner Simmons and then Commissioner Arnerich.
Thank you, Chair Tatson. And Martin, thank you for your presentation. I have two questions for you. The first is the model, the report on the model discusses moving towards a clean car. Did the model also consider moving towards clean buses in terms of impact on greenhouse gases? Because I didn't see anything in there that suggested
Absolutely, yeah. The MFAC model includes buses and includes a shift to hybrid, and we have significantly cleaner buses in the future.
Did it consider also the move to all electric buses as is occurring with the downtown trolley?
I would have to look into that. Okay. That's a detail. I don't know what the percentage of all electric is.
And this is probably more to see if you have an opinion on it, because I suspect I don't know if the model looked at that. But over the last year, the city of Walnut Creek has directly subsidized a second bus route and indirectly subsidizes a third bus route, and the ridership tripled in both areas. Do you have any thoughts on what impact providing that type of subsidy would have on vehicle miles traveled and on greenhouse gases?
Go ahead. I turned mine.
I'm done.
Okay. So what you're really talking about is pricing, and you know, if you give everybody free Clipper cards, they will they will ride transit more if you lower the cost to zero. Same thing with vehicle miles traveled. If gas prices go up, vehicle miles traveled goes down and gas consumption goes down. That chart that I showed you that had I said 100% is for California is 14 billion gallons per year. Well, the January numbers are in, and they actually show, if you annualize it, the consumption in January went up to 15 billion gallons because prices went down, so there's more driving. But pricing is very important, and we have assumed that there is a cost that households have to out-of-pocket cost to transit ridership. We haven't given them free rides, but we could model that to see what happens.
Thank you. Commissioner Arnerich and then Commissioner Peoples.
Thank you, Chair. Martin, thank you for the presentation. I think it was very concise and well presented. So we're doing comments and mixing up questions. I think what we need to acknowledge, and Tom has actually said both. He said it didn't work, but yet it does work. And I think we have to accept that that's really what it is. That, my vision is a zero-gravity car. And a zero-gravity car is unique. It has no friction, right? So if there's no friction, I can push it with my finger, and once it starts moving, it won't stop until you use something to do that. That's transformative. That uses a battery system, and it uses the polarity of the Earth. It uses the negative charge. How do you get the energy in there? And, there's beams of energy that provide, that's transformative. We're not that agency. I'd like to be that agency, but the table that we're sitting at, we have a couple of responsibilities. We have some responsibilities for systems that are mandatory, systems that are essential to get an ambulance from one place to the other, to get a fire truck, goods and services. Some of that we have to deal with. So the model, as much as we'd like it to tell us something different, is based on all of those rules that we know today. And only certain elements are accounted for to change. But I think what is transformative, and I agree with what Tom said, and I think we've said it a few times here, that in our current measure, in the last two, we were building things and we committed every single dollar. That I think the consensus that we've been getting to is we're putting categories of funding areas, looking at opportunities, but we're not willing in most categories to commit all that money. Because the transformative things are going to be, if we get to a point, by the way, and there's a lot of estimates that in 50 years, we could be out of gas for a variety of reasons. That's transformative. We have to find an alternative. We need to be able to respond to those things. I think the core elements that we're trying to put in on bikes, on real serious linkages, on trail systems, on other modes, multimodal transportation systems, are going to be transformative, but we cannot account for those because right now we can't honestly say, everybody's going to ride a bike to work. We can't say that. That would be, I think it would be unethical to tell our taxpayers, by the way, we want you to vote for this proposal. Trust us that that's going to happen. I don't think we can do that. So I think this is a realistic approach, but I think our transformative ideas that are inherent in there and the opportunity to do something as technology comes up, respond to it, and help push the pendulum one way or the other, I think we're unique because none of the other, if you look at all the other transportation plans in California, the self-help agencies, they're all projects, programs, and they're predetermined. So I think we have an opportunity to do, Tom, what you're talking about. And, and I think we're getting close to that kind of a consensus, which is not what we've done in the past.
Okay, Commissioner Peoples, and then I'd like to go to the public comment.
Yeah, just to follow up on something Bob said, CARB has a proposal that's going to require all of us to be 100% zero emission by 2040, which would mean by 2028, 100% of our purchases would have to be zero emission. Now, there's some pushback on that from Southern California because they've spent a lot of money converting to CNG, but that's definitely out there. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is, again, in terms of flexibility.
flexibility is a really good idea, but a number of things that everybody around this table does have very long lead times. If I order a bus today, I won't get it for 2 years. And once I get it, the FTA requires me to keep it for 12 years. So that's a 14-year commitment. And you don't do that on maybe some group is going to give you flexible money 5 years from now.
Thank you. So I have two speakers. So if anyone else would like to speak, simply ask you to fill out one of the speaker slips. Our first speaker is Steve Larson, to be followed by Jason Pizas. Welcome. I just ask each of you to limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Welcome. Thank you. My name is Steve Larson. Thank you for listening to me. I'm the Vice Chair of the Byron Municipal Advisory Council. I'm here and asking you for your support of State Route 239, in particular the airport connector. The improved Highway 4 basically stops at Brentwood. And there's lots of traffic, lots of trucks moving on into the Central Valley. We need a better road to get us into the Central Valley. There's lots of commerce that's having to go around or drive on roads that really aren't built for it. The airport connector would bring jobs in an area that is not growing like the rest of Contra Costa County is. We are smaller. I believe there's a need to put a high volume road for this high volume traffic. J4 is getting very dangerous. Been multiple fatalities, head-on crashes on that road over the past few years. In fact, I've been forced off the road 3 times in the past 6 months. I drive back and forth into Tracy. So please, I'd like you to consider, although I know transportation and highways are probably not the future of us, but right now and for the near future it is, and trucks aren't going to go to electric anytime soon. We've got to get them on a road that's more appropriate. Thank you for your time.
Are there any questions of the speaker? Okay. Thank you. And again, if anyone else would like to speak, please fill out a speaker slip. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm pleased to see there's actually some discussion at least about the future and how things can change, being transformative, and we're not dealing right now at least with, there's still more to develop, that not the laundry list of projects and programs and everything that we see at so many of these plans. I was really sobered when I saw that proposed zero-emission vehicle penetration, mainly because, you know, I've done a lot of research back with the history of transportation. In the Pat Brown era, it was very simple, and for many years it was just a fuel excise tax, and you just kind of let the money roll in, and we see that that primary source is going to basically disappear of transportation fund by 2040. But I do think, and we heard Commissioner Arnerich say we're not that agency at one point, I really think there needs to be a robust discussion publicly, and MTC has not really taken the lead on this, about the future of transportation finance. This particular agency is limited, basically. You're in the business of putting a sales tax on the ballot and apparently increasing the sales tax. And I have to guess, when I see this, the way that's going down and seeing how the fuel taxes are likely going to go down inevitably with that too, that I can see in another 10 years, whoever is in this commission is going to come back and say, let's raise the tax to 1.5% and then 2% and everything else. But there needs to be a conversation about how we finance transportation. And that also should be coming up right now immediately. What are these electric vehicles doing? What is their fair share? Hybrids, how do you get them to do the fair share? I know some people are talking about maybe even having vehicle miles traveled be a tax based on that. That's beyond the scope of this agency, but still I don't think it's good to commit for, I don't know how long this plan is for, 25, 30 years, and these changes could happen, and it seems like it's too much to be committing to. And I'd also say, too, about with the sales tax, it's regressive. You know, it hits the poor harder. Reality of this, when you increase the sales tax by 0.5%, that means there's some person who's going to, with the necessities of life, like a toothbrush, a $2 toothbrush is going to cost another penny. A $2 worth of toothpaste is going to cost another penny. And it just seems that if we're not dealing with this issue about the electric cars and what they do to the roads and everything at the same time, there needs to be a bigger conversation. MTC, I have to criticize public participation. It's difficult dealing with that agency, period. Caltrans, that's almost too remote. And I know they're having some 2040 plan that's on the being public comments on. I haven't read it yet. But the point is there are bigger issues, and I'm glad that at least we're starting to talk about these bigger issues here. And I kind of think this is a good start. But the reality is when I saw that ZEV penetration, there goes how we fund all of our roads right now and traditionally have, and what we do. And I don't think increasing the sales tax every 10 years is going to be the solution. So I think that, honestly, again, needs to be talked about. Thank you.
Any questions of the speaker? All right, so let me bring it back. This is
Well,
an
just to
information,
comment
if I could just finish.
There's a state.
Hang on.
The state commission that's in the process of looking at that.
Okay, thank you. This is an item for information only, but if we wish to give any direction to staff, I'm sure they'd be appreciative. Are there any final comments before we move on to the remaining item? Oh, okay, if you could bring that up. Okay, well, you could have 3 minutes now. All right. And again, if anyone else would like to speak, it would be a great time to bring up your speaker card. This is Londa Thaman. And welcome.
Hello, thank you. It's Linda Tooman.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I've been called much worse.
Well, didn't look like an eye. I apologize.
Thank you for your time. I'm here representing a group of neighbors. We're in support of 239. We suffer through a lot of traffic problems as a result of a lot of commercial vehicles using residential streets. And our neighbors are actually in support of alternate forms of transportation. We would prefer to do more bicycling, hiking, and walking, but several of our streets are truly unsafe because of the problems that we're encountering with the commercial traffic on that road. And also, I think it would certainly cut down on some of the concerns with the pollution if all of these vehicles weren't sitting in place, idling, and et cetera, et cetera. At any rate, thank you for your time. Just would like to mention our support for that.
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker? Thank you. Thank you again. All right. Perhaps Commissioner Durant has decided. He hasn't turned his light on, so I could. All right. So, Commissioner Bart.
Well, I'm not going to beat this much anymore, but I really do think we ought to look at changing our principle number 5 because this plan is just inconsistent with it. And it's the one that talks about reduction of greenhouse gas and vehicle miles traveled. And the plans we have now do not accomplish that. So something needs to be changed or there's going to be an internal inconsistency.
Great. Thank you. Oh, now I see Commissioner Durant. All right.
Look, Newell was just sort of muttering what I was going to say, which is, look, if we do nothing, it gets much worse. So on the one hand, we can do something and try to make it better, and even with the presentation that we've had, modest improvement in some categories is better than no improvement, and in fact is better than, full-scale degradation of the system and the quality of life. But the ironic part is, and perhaps Newell said it when he said this isn't that agency, is there's really a handful of things that can be done that are truly transformational. And the reality is, even a 2.33 or a $3 billion bond measure or sales tax measure isn't even going to get close to some of the kinds of things that at least I would think of as transformational. Of course, part of the problem is we keep using that word, but nobody's really defined what the heck it means in this context. The last public speaker just said it, right? Safer streets will get more people walking, more people biking. Safer communities where you don't have people snatching kids off the streets will actually get kids biking to schools again and parking their bicycles in school parking lots, which is, largely a thing of the past. Providing free buses will make life a hell of a lot easier. Most of the research that's out there today will show you it's not only price sensitivity, but if you make the buses free, like the Walnut Creek shuttles, people will actually hop on the bus. But if it's not free and it takes a long time, people are not going to use it. Same thing with rail. If you want to provide free rail, I bet you we could get a whole bunch more people riding BART. You'd have a little parking problem. You'd have a little, some other problems to deal with. If you provided, the free opportunity to have high-density commercial and office in places like Brentwood and Antioch and out near Byron and get the extension. You can do a whole bunch of those sorts of things that actually would reduce your vehicle miles traveled and do a heck of a lot of beneficial stuff. Having said that, I think everybody's chuckling because everything I just said is insane. The reality is you won't get to those sorts of things because we don't have the kind of dollars to make those kinds of investments to be truly transformational. So it's kind of ironic to me to be talking about it as though, you know, what is in the grand scheme of things in a Bay Area that's actually doing better than the rest of the state with respect to these things, as though we're doing something horrible and terrible in this area and we haven't done enough, we haven't tried enough as a county, forget this body, to try to solve and tackle these problems. The Bay Area is far ahead of the rest of the state when it comes to public transit, when it comes to biking and walking and using alternative modes to get to work. It's far beyond the rest of the state, perhaps except for Los Angeles, when it comes to people working from home. The studies are all pretty, you know, unequivocal about this stuff, regardless of where they're funded from. So I just sort of like us to sort of move toward having a more rational conversation without the labels that really don't mean anything at the end of the day. And if, in fact, what we're demonstrating here is, despite the fact that you're talking about a near 30% increase in population, we actually are going to be achieving benefits and reducing things, I don't know how that's bad.
And I would just comment that, you know, we think about our measure. Well, on average, during the next 25 years, we'll have a population of about 1.1 million in the county. We're going to raise about $2.3 billion. And so if my math works, that's about $80 per person per year. That is not, I mean, that's a significant amount of money when aggregated, but it is not a life-changing event per se. And we can use it to generate as much leverage as possible. But I think we need to look at it in the perspective of what it is compared, let's say, the gross domestic product of the county. Having said that, I have commented and historically about sometimes when we've had goals about reducing congestion, and my view has really been all we're trying to do is really make congestion less bad than it would have been. And so I would welcome Commissioner Butt maybe taking a look at Goal 5 and seeing if you can give us a redraft that is consistent with what we can achieve. Don't have to do it tonight, I mean, by any means. But. All right, so let's move on to item 3.2. This is a general update on the activities and status of development of the 2.1 version of the Transportation Expenditure Plan, which we'll see at our next meeting on March 29th. Mr. Chittenden.
Thank you, Chair.
Welcome.
Thank you. Ross Chittenden, Deputy Executive Director here at the Authority, and you'll actually see your next version on Friday. So I'm just going to, as you say, provide a little overview of some of the activities we're working on to update the plan that you saw last week, taking the input from, or the direction that you provided at that meeting, taking input from the RTPC review, a lot of the public comments that we've received. Our comment log is got to be over 200 items by now. I'm looking at Matt over there. I think we're over 200 items and probably 25 pages. So we're sifting through that to look for common areas and making sure that whether we accept a comment into the plan or not, that people get a response as to why we're recommending the action we are. So a lot of activity underway. And what I want to do is just very briefly walk through the things that you can expect to see changed from what you've seen in the past. When I'm done with that, if you'd like to provide some additional direction, or if you think that we've captured things inconsistent with what you want, I'm very open to that. And then one of the observations that I think has happened this month and will ratchet up, or should ratchet up the next couple of months, I know almost everybody, every one of you sitting up there right now are very engaged in the process, and I think that's different from where we were 4 or 5 weeks ago. So I thank you for your help in that, and we'll need to continue that through April and May as we roll out the next couple of versions and and really get down to what we need to put in front of the cities for their consideration, the board, and ultimately the public. So in some regard, maybe the real discussion's happening beginning next week, because right now we're still taking input and refining what we think we've heard. Just a real quick list of things we're working on. We heard the need to be a little more succinct with the preface, so we're working on that. You'll see a new version of that, and perhaps we can incorporate some of Commissioner Butt's thoughts into that as we rework that document. Major changes to some of the funding categories. Working with Bart, so we actually have a meeting tomorrow with some of the Bart board members and staff to walk through the language that may appear in one or both of the measures. So we're working very hard to, as we've said from the beginning, is to make sure if these measures both make it on the ballot, they're compatible, work together, the voters can see there's benefit in both of these measures, not one over the other or one excluding the other. Some general updates. I think some of the speakers who have testified before you tonight will be happy to see some of the proposed language changes related to the East County Corridor, reflecting the need to do something quickly in the town of Byron. We got some good feedback on the major streets category, complete streets policy. We'll take the input we got from you. Primary focus there will be to look at structuring a pilot that we think works for all the RTPCs. We're getting a lot of comment on that, but we, at least at staff and the consultant, and I think I heard it last week, we see that the pilot is not to demonstrate that we don't know how to implement complete streets projects, is to demonstrate that we mean that we're going to do it out of this category. So again, I think that might address some of the thoughts of Commissioner Butt. This isn't going to be something we talk about and we don't do. It's we're really going to do it, and that's the purpose of the pilot. Not to say that we can't do it, is to say that we will do it. Let's see. We need to rework the language transportation for seniors and people with disabilities. Again, that's one that the only comment we've received on that is, well, two comments. We love it, and the other is if we can find a way to add funds, we should be thinking about that. The allocation table that was in the draft, that will be updated to reflect the input from the RTPCs, mainly distributing the allocation of the regional choice bucket. And one thing, we got into a little discussion last week, and I wanted to make a comment there, and I couldn't get my microphone to work. This process, I think, is a little different than last time. Okay, that's kind of obvious, but I think we've been trying to be. I think it's a little more bottoms up, and I know that was reflected in a comment that Commissioner Arnerich made. Why is Central have a larger share of the major streets? Well, that's what they asked for. So it's something. I think it's good that it's bottoms up and it reflects the unique characteristics of the different regions of the county. And on the flip side, we may want to have some conversation about countywide programs. Is there a benefit of having more consistency in some of the programs? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's something we'll probably want to talk about a little bit. And we're hearing about that from some of the stakeholders. Is this 4 plans sewn together, or is this really have a countywide structure? That then are there opportunities if we strengthen some of those countywide linkages? Some of the outstanding issues that may or may not be in the version you see Friday, depending on how we get things resolved. Again, one of the things I should say on Friday, or about the version you're going to see Friday, there's a number of things that are in discussion with a lot of the stakeholders. So for those, we may just continue to carry over language that's primarily a carryover from Measure J, instead of putting out language that's kind of half-baked and having it misinterpreted. So I can't commit that all these will be in Friday's version, and we'll need to continue to work on those through April and May. The Growth Management Program, Urban Limit Line, great discussion. I think a lot of progress made last week. A couple of things we still need to continue to work on is consideration of an agricultural mitigation program, something that's very important to a lot of our stakeholders. And then on the urban limit line, we want to, taking some direction from last week, we want to get our staff together with some of the county staff and really put together, again, language that we are both comfortable with putting in the public and not float something and have a debate here on whether it really got it right. So at least get something that respective staffs think they can work with, and then we can have that debate here and at the Board of Supervisors. We're continuing to need to find the right place for project performance measures, and this is a little different than Martin's discussion. So his was a programmatic review of a large investment. Project performance measures would really be criteria to help us select the right project where there is some flexibility between one project or another, or there's multiple alternatives for some of the large project categories, and we're looking at different ways to do that. The minimum may be the MTC evaluation that Martin alluded to, but there may be some other criteria that's appropriate. Oversight Committee, where you gave us some direction to look at options for sizing of that committee. I think the consensus towards the end of the meeting was that we really need oversight over advisory. So we're taking that, and if that's different from what you would like, the direction you'd like us to take, I'd like to hear that later. The membership, we're looking at structures that could be anywhere from 6 to 25 members. So we'll try to give you some array of choices on that. Overarching factors that we're continuing to work on, and then this is where I think there'll almost certainly be some work to do after the next week's draft. We've had a lot of discussions here and a lot of discussions, stakeholder group and offline, on infill. Again, the question that I keep posing is, what's the appropriate nexus between a transportation measure and incentivizing infill, and for whatever that is, what's the best mechanism of investments that actually achieve results? We just don't need a lot of money out there that do nice things. This is targeted for a specific purpose, and we should really, if we're committed to that, we should really make that our purpose. Various sub-regional equity issues, I've touched on that a little bit. We need to find a way to help Bart finance cars in a manner that's equitable to all the regions. I mentioned the countywide programs and how those are best administered. Are they better administered at the RTPC level, or better administered at this level? I think we'll continue that discussion. And I think a large one will bring back, I don't know if we'll have this done next week. I'm looking at Mala. We owe you some information on a question of should we be looking at a new standalone measure, or would some of the things we're trying to do in this measure require that we incorporate some of Measure J into and effectively merge the two measures? I don't know if that's the right term, but that's the term I'm using, is that we'd merge these going forward. So that sounds like a lot more questions than answers, and it is, and that's why I, again, want to reiterate that we're still considering this a draft. I'll go through a few more iterations. Again, the goal is that, or not the goal, the necessity to make the November ballot is that we have something that we're comfortable with and we can live with for our meeting in May. So that's our target, about 6 weeks out, to have a measure that we believe would be successful in being accepted by the cities, the Board of Supervisors, and ultimately the public if we put it on the ballot. So time is ticking. So with that, quick summary, and if you'd like to provide some direction on things I missed, or refocus us on some of the things I talked about, I'd love to hear it.
So just one beginning question. I think initially we had thought about having a draft ready after the March 29th meeting that could then go out to the RTPCs and the jurisdictions for comments. It's unlikely we will get there next week. So is it your view now that we send that out sometime in April, or that as we are doing, the RTPCs continue to meet on a relatively frequent basis and RTPC members carry this to their jurisdictions, and then we just have one round of transmittal in the the end of May or sometime in May?
Well, okay, so that's a great question, and this might be a little wishful thinking. The hope is that coming out of next week's meeting, we, staff and the consultant team, have a draft that you've reviewed and a fairly succinct set of comments that says, make these changes and send it out. So that may be, again, that might be wishful thinking. We may need to bring it back again, but the goal would be that we get relatively close and get comfort from the board here that at the end of the meeting, we have the comments we need to do a final update that could then be circulated for comment.
And I know that there's been a small number of EPAC members who have been meeting separately from any of us who are preparing a proposal. Do you feel that you're enough in touch with what they're thinking about as well as what you're hearing at the authority that you can give us a recommendation that you think represents a reasonable balance of authority direction and key points raised by stakeholders?
To be honest, personally, no.
Okay.
And I think there's still quite a breadth of discussion that's occurring with the group, they've been meeting certainly with our encouragement, and feedback is it sounds like it's more productive to do without us, and so I can't answer that question.
Okay. So it's conceivable that our next meeting will have the draft 2.1 and the correspondence or presentation from members of our EPAC group, which could be the same or could be quite different.
Quite possible.
Yes.
All right. What I'd like to do is maybe take any public comment on this and then bring it back for authority discussion. So is there anyone who would like to comment on this item? I know, that's good. All right, seeing none. So then Commissioner Arnerich and then Commissioner Mitchell. Mitchoff. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say, Ross, thank you for the work you do. I know you live and breathe this. I think you're being honest, but I think you've done a tremendous job and a big lift to get us to move along. It's kind of like, your birthday comes up and you ask for all these great things and you didn't get them all. And sometimes you're unhappy, you don't like that person, you don't invite them back to your party. It's hard. So I don't have a birthday coming up anymore, so I don't get anything. But I think we have done some really good things. And we've had, and I want to thank our county supervisor, Karen Mitchoff, and Federer's not here. That was a really good discussion last week. And I think it was being honest. It might not be what everybody wants, but I think it was honest. And it also was something that I think is important. It actually offered, well, here's what we can do. And I thought that was huge, so thank you for that. And I know tomorrow staff's going to be meeting with, and our chair and a couple of others are going to be meeting with Bart. There's some serious issues we have to go through, some real concerns, but there's an opportunity to create a win-win solution that makes everybody really good in this. And I know there's going to be some clashing over things, but I think there's serious issues that we do have a perfect opportunity right now to find a good long-term solution. One of the things I wanted to raise, and it's something we just came back with, as you know, both in La Miranda and in the San Ramon Valley, there's been a school bus program. The one in the San Ramon Valley is a congestion relief. Its sole purpose was because of the way the nature of schools were built, you couldn't pave your way out of the problem. Schools were designed for 300 to 400 kids. They have 1,200 kids, and they spent $750 million building new schools, and so we couldn't build our way out of that. The program has eliminated, just in the past year, over 1 million car trips. 1 million car trips. What's interesting about it is the cost. It's $1.64 per car trip. And if you think about that, you can't turn your car on a cold start for $1.64 just for the fuel burn. And I had an opportunity to meet with County Connection, Rick Ramasier, and the chair of that, to talk about what are futuristic ideas here. And believe it or not, Bob Simmons has already talked about it. And the proposal in terms of categories, we have bus and other non-rail. Somebody was saying, oh, let's take off the word bus. Actually, we need to leave that. County Connection's problem is not like Bart's. Bart doesn't have enough capacity to carry the number of people that want to go on it. County Connection has more capacity than you can imagine. And the problem is, on an equity basis, trying to keep the buses running, but the reality is they're empty. Except when they went through a program where they did fare waivers, they went up 50% and doubled the ridership. The cost of the entire system to do that was about 5 or 6%. So from an investment point of view, the car trip model, if you can get more people to ride a system that has a huge capacity, and we've always we do have Fair Pass programs we do through a variety of programs, and some employers do that. We really should think in a transformative way. If you want somebody to do it, why buy another bus, by the way, a new electric bus? It's $500,000. And as you say, it's a 14-year hold. It's $500,000. The math doesn't work out on that right now in today's dollars, that actually is a good value proposition given the number of riders on that. That's a pretty expensive. But taking the assets that we already have, putting $1 million or $2 million a year under a program to see a fare waiver program is cheaper. I mean, you could buy 4 buses for that. The reality is I think that those are the types of programs, and County Connection, for those of us in Central, the La Miranda, and South County, we don't have any other way. We don't have any more roads. We don't have capacity in our roads, but we need to get people on there. So I want to make sure that the language that we have in there allows us to do that. And those are very clear measurements. We have a study on our traffic program that came back at $1.64. We went, wow. And we were absolutely shocked at how cost effective it is. And so, part of the measure from that region, part of their ask and their local return money is to help increase that program, because it shows we can probably go up 50% or double the number. And what if we hit 2 million car trips? So I just hope in our big thinking that, and I know Janet was talking about, she wants to make sure hers goes to bus. That's their decision. They have a value proposition with AC Transit. Those buses are pretty full. It's a system that's very different than ours. Ours isn't a capital issue. Ours is a ridership issue. And I know Rick, I don't see him here tonight, but I know that he supports that idea. And so I hope we consider that. So thank you.
So Commissioner Mitchoff, then Commissioner Abelson, then Commissioner Hudson.
Well, and I may be jumping the gun, but Ross was talking about the scheduling, and originally our meeting next week was going to be the long one where we brought our pajamas.
Right.
And I'm just trying to figure out, we shouldn't be planning on bringing our pajamas next week.
No, I think bring your sleeping bags.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. But I'm jumping ahead probably on the agenda, but I'm looking at the meeting schedule, and this is just our usual meeting schedule. And at some point before the evening's over, I'd like to go in with what you were saying, because we did put a meeting on last week for April 6th. But you mentioned going into May, so do we need to plan on every Wednesday night from here until May? And that's fine. I just need to know that.
So we
But
do
not a-
we do have currently have a meeting scheduled for April 6th.
No, I know, but should we have one for 13th, 20th, and 27th too? Is my question.
Well, my advice would be no, because we're hoping that during that time is where we're really out working the plan instead of tweaking it.
Okay, that's fine. I just, so the 6th.
Yeah, at least that would be my recommendation. There's just so much going on. If we're just keep chasing the
No, I agree
perfect
with
idea,
you.
we'll
You're saying then in May we'll be coming back to finalize it before, because it's going
Yeah.
out to the RTPCs, then it'll come back to us in May to get ready
Yeah.
to go out to the cities and the county.
So we have May 4th and the 18th. Yeah, maybe we start talking about some other. I don't know, the 11th probably conflicts with some of your other meetings, but somewhere in there, because that May 18th day, we really cannot slip that at all.
Okay, that's fine. Do we need to bring, well, I
But
don't
let's
mean
bring
to
it back when we get to the calendar.
No,
though.
I would like to know the time commitment from here on out. Are we going, and that's fine. I just need to know.
Okay. Commissioner Abelson and then Commissioner Hudson.
Thank you. I appreciate what Newell had to say about the buses. However, I just want to totally reiterate that it's not the same in every part of the county. And to say that the model of buses is empty buses is maybe is true in an area that is dominated by cars, but in some areas it's the only way people can get around, and it's not the same situation at all.
Janet, just to be
no,
clear,
let me finish.
That's exactly what I said. So maybe you weren't listening.
You didn't say it exactly like that, and I haven't been able to finish saying what I was going to say, so you don't know even what I was going to say. But there are some areas of the county where the only way people can get around is that bus. They don't have a car sitting in the driveway, and the bus gets them where they want to go when they want to go. And to be quite honest, I'm one of those people. I can talk about it. And so to talk about it as though the model were, empty buses is just not always true. And that's why I think it really is important that we recognize that each area of the county may be different as we go forward. So I hope that we will kind of think of it that way, that we're all unique. And doesn't mean we're good, bad, or indifferent. I actually like to think it means we're good. But, we're all different, and that's okay. Like, I have 5 kids, and they're all different, but you know what? I love them all. So, anyway, that's all I really wanted to say.
Thank you. Commissioner Hudson.
Yeah, I took something different out of what Commissioner Arndrich was saying. In fact, I want to go back to it because I think it's an important part where the traffic's taken 1 million cars off the road. Well, that model is multiple helping what we're trying to do. I don't know, the words aren't coming out, long day. We're creating a culture that we didn't have before. So we're no longer that same area where we used to be, where people didn't know what a bus was. And I was in a meeting today, and Randy came in right behind me, where we're trying to educate the Air District to things are changing out here. We are going to change, more than likely, in Bishop Ranch, the idea of running all these buses, even though they're free, and they're pretty full when business is going on. It will go to a central point, and we will run out these electric shuttles that you've heard about that we'll be testing at the Go Minimum Station. And they're not talking about 1 or 2 of these things. You might have 20 running around the park or whatever it takes for last mile and to get people around. And you think about what we're doing with traffic's taking 1 million cars off, you take another 1 million cars off, it adds up. And these are electric. And on top of that, they're doing a hydrogen. The whole culture has changed where we're at because of this. But what I really want to talk to for a minute is, this is the first time I start listening, I guess, where the hard date of May comes in. And as I start working back on how we do this, I will agree there are different areas of the county of where they are and what they want out of this expenditure plan. If SWAT goes into their meeting on Monday, it is Monday, right? I keep forgetting. So many of them now, they run together. And we don't change anything, and we think we've got something. I'm wondering if it isn't time to run up a test flag at one of the cities. Now, before I jump out there and say, Dave, are you nuts? We haven't finished the whole thing. I got a little bit of a problem in that my city, the first meeting in April, the second Tuesday, may be the only meeting we have in April and the last meeting we have before we go into a new place, which is also an opportunity because there's a whole new audio-visual thing, and I'm wondering if that shouldn't be, if we shoot for it, the first test pattern. And we've been working towards keeping the rest of the county educated with the renewals reports, very well received by my council. And I'm thinking maybe we practice what we want to do and get ready to see if at the first meeting we can't trot this out to get the blessing of picking out San Ramon, because our TEP has been pretty well set, and using what we've been doing, Newell, if we can volunteer you, and pitch this and see if we can't get the routine down that we want to use throughout the county. It may be different people or whatever, but it's going to happen fast. And you can't, I mean, we can't take Don and send him to 5 different meetings. We could try, or, you know, but you want to pick 5 people or whatever, but they're, as is pointed out, they're all a little bit different. So I'm starting to think, let's start focusing on when do you think the first meeting that we can get responses back from the city should be? And maybe I'm pushy. I'd love to see it in April. But that's my own personal feeling.
Well, my sense is I think that's part of the intent if we have a document that we circulate in April, that it would go to the cities. Certainly, in our case, we now have a standing agenda item for update on where the discussions are. I haven't circulated a document, but my sense is I'm trying to minimize the surprises of our council members when something shows up. So,
Piggybacking, I think this April mayor's conference, I mean, really put a little extra time in the speech, Newell, you're going to do, or for Newell.
Hopefully we have one plan.
Well, it isn't so hopefully we have one. It's that we're starting to come together on one direction, where people are starting, this thing isn't just a bunch of talk and going around and around and nobody's being educated. It might even be mention 2 or 3 of the things that need to come together in the next week or 2, that kind of stuff. Because my feedback is they're listening to you. They may be the only one. No, they're listening to you, what you have to say.
okay. Other comments? Otherwise, we can end early without sleeping bags. Commissioner Worth.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on some of the conversations about transit in the county. You know, we have the benefit of, if you look at the numbers, our transit agencies are among the most efficient in California in terms of the cost per rider and the riders they move. At the same time, though, the challenges of providing suburban transportation is a challenge because we're dealing with lower density communities and we serve the broadest range of riders in the state. So I guess one of the things to keep in mind, and I think it maybe goes to this issue of how are we using this measure to transform, you know, to reduce VMT. I think that, for example, you know, we look at the opportunities, county connection, since we've discussed that, you know, we have buses in that system that are running packed to the gills. When we have direct routes that go from Bart out into the communities to serve commuters, those are full. We have school trip riders across the service area, and they're packed every single day. So I think that one of the challenges that we have with this measure, and bless you, it is to really look at that opportunity to take, you know, in addition to serving the transit-dependent communities and individuals, that is to start to convert people who have a choice, who can choose to take a bus to Bart, or put their kids on a on a county connection bus to go to school. So I think that I think that this is something that the county connection and all the boards, you know, and now Tri-Delta with eBart coming out into East County, it's going to start to play an increasing role in converting people from the automobile to transit. So I think it's important to recognize that and I think one of the things about the language in this measure, picking up on what Randy said about nimbleness and technology, I think that the technology is going to be a really important piece in the future of transit. And as we look at, you know, how do we continue to invest and use these scarce dollars so we can, you know, provide the most service. So.
Well, thank you. I wanted to end the meeting with 4 sort of fun announcements. One is I would like to thank staff for winning the Organization of the Year from the California Transportation Foundation, and to thank my fellow commissioners who have made all that possible. It's reflects well on all of us. Second, I would like to wish Commissioner Bart happy birthday, 35. And I know that we're going to be all looking forward to the latest draft TEP on Friday, and I would encourage all of us to essentially send questions of clarification into staff before Wednesday's meeting, so to the extent we could get those answered, that might speed the meeting up because it's going to be quite late. And then finally, I would note that we have an harassment and discrimination prevention policy, which we all need to sign, and perhaps we could just leave it and pick up. And then we want, okay, Commissioner Arnott, you had.
I just wanted to bring up something Randy had mentioned. We had talked about this before because I saw Joe Sobrante here. Joe is this year head of the Public Managers Association. Joe Calabriga was last year. So those are our city managers. And to be clear, in checking with them, I brought up last time the issue that the PMA did a lot of work for about 6-7 months on trying to come up with agreement. And they came up finally to that 23% return to source, supported some changes that they're hearing on county urban limit line. But with that, they were under the entire assumption and their position of kind of falling off and coming all the way down to 30% is that the rules between the Measure J and Measure X would be the same for that, and that we'd still uphold all the state standards, all of our growth management standards. So I want to make sure that as we go forward, that was a pretty important issue. Otherwise, they're going to go back with a different position. So just to recognize it.
Commissioner Romick.
Just a quick question. Next week meeting, is it Tuesday or Wednesday?
Tuesday.
Okay.
Tuesday.
It is going into Wednesday.
Going into Wednesday, perhaps. Which brings us to the topic of the schedule that is on our agenda and that Commissioner Mitroff had raised. And Ross, do you think it'd be wise if we scheduled a May 4th and a May 25th meeting in addition to the ones on the 4th and the 18th?
Not the 25th.
What?
We need to be done by we need to be finished by May 18th.
Okay, so May 11th meeting then?
Yeah, I think that might be wise, and that I think gets back to coupling with the comment. I would not recommend additional meetings in April,
right.
But then we need to roll up our sleeves in May.
So we have concurrence to add a May 11th meeting? Yes. That's what I read. Okay, I think I'm seeing concurrence.
Yes. May 18th.
Well, that's already on the agenda, so yes. Right, to this agenda, all right. If there are no other comments, we are adjourned, and again, congratulations to everyone for the award. And I see the luncheon's on April 25th, right?